Can your local bank just go in and take your savings without asking, keep it, and never give it back? Yeah, unfortunately, they can, and it's all 100% legal. Let's get into it. So, you may not be familiar with the term bail in. You may be more familiar with the term bailout. We bailed out banks in the past. 2007 and 8 was a great example. Banks fail, they make bad investments. The government came in, printed money, and saved the banks. This seemed to piss off a lot of people, and the Dodd Frank Bill was then passed so that bailouts would never happen. However, what they didn't tell you is that bail-ins are replacing them. And what bail-ins are is anything over the FDIC insured amount of $250,000 in any given bank that you may hold is susceptible to seizure if the bank fails. Now, you may say, well, I don't have $250,000, so that doesn't bother me. Well, it should bother you, and I'm going to get into that in just a moment. But before I do, make sure you smash that subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like, give us a comment. We like to know where it is that you're watching from. I know we have a lot of international folks out there, so give that a holler, and make sure you share this wherever you can. Now, let's move on to the nuts and bolts of this whole thing. The FDIC is well aware, of course, that these bailouts exist. And you may be wondering, how did you not know about it, if in fact you did not know about it? Well, what's interesting is recently there was a leaked conversation within a meeting in the FDIC, and they literally were discussing whether or not it made sense to tell you, the average Joe, about bail-ins and how they work and how your money is actually susceptible to them. And you'll be a little bit surprised by their answer, or maybe you won't.
I mean, it's a little bit conflicted, right? I mean, it's important that people understand they can be bailed in, but you don't want a huge run on the institution. But they're going to be. And it could be an early warning signal to the FDIC and the primary regulators when these things happen. And there may be some other prices, this is similar to what Jay was saying, in the market that you can tell whether people understand who's going to be protected, who isn't going to be protected. It would be, I think, an interesting study to look at the evolution of market prices in a situation like March of 2020, for example, and see whether people understood what might happen.
I might go further than that, Don, because I think that you look at the evolution, I think we have to sit down and talk to long-term debt investors and make sure that they, as a stakeholder group, fully understand bank debt today is not what it was before. It is not principal protected by design. And I think that expectation, I like how you started off, Betsy, like it's all about expectation setting. And I think that is absolutely critical. If that doesn't hold, this whole thing doesn't hold.
We're dealing with a society where people are getting their information in tweets. There's just no patience, I think, for going through the elaborate and careful planning that has gone on. It should be there. It should be accessible when people need to know. But I don't think you have much hope of reaching a public that doesn't have a professional need to know.
I completely agree with that. I almost think you'd scare the public if you put this out. Like, why are they telling me this? Should I be concerned about my bank? Like, my insurance company doesn't tell me what they're doing with my assets. They just assume they're going to pay my claim, right? I think you've got to think of the unintended consequences of taking a public that has more full faith and confidence in the banking system than maybe people in this room do. That we want them to have full faith and confidence in the banking system. They know the FDIC insurance is there. They know it works. They put their money in. They're going to get their money out. So there's a select crowd of people that are in the institutional side. And if they want to understand this, they're going to find a way to understand this. There's a bunch of law firms represented in this room. There's a bunch of people that charge them by the hour a lot of money to explain this all to them. And it's fine. I don't have a problem with that. And they all have huge staffs. But I would be careful about the unintended consequences of starting to blast too much of this out in the general public.
So you see how they're saying this is not something we want to tell the general public, right? It's not. Now, of course, this is the one beauty of us being in an era where older people don't really wrap their head around the internet. because in the day and age of the internet, to even allow a conversation like that to take place on camera just gives us hope that we're going to hear all kinds of fun stuff, because these people really don't get it. But there it is. They had the conversation, and they seriously look at you as just being, meaningless, and just be quiet, just have faith. We need you to have faith. We need you to believe in the system. Believing in the system is everything. It's almost like a religion. The second everyone stops believing in the system, the whole house of cards falls down. And so that is their concern about letting people know about what bail-ins are. I don't share that concern, because in reality, I think we all understand if we run to the bank and try and pull our money out and put it under our bed, well, everything's going to collapse, and your money's going to become worthless, and everything's just going to be a hot mess. So the question is, how do we mitigate and alleviate risk in this situation? And how do we go ahead and change this so that this is no longer the case? Well, let's start with how we mitigate. So if you have more than $250,000 in the bank, in one bank, right? Let's say you have 300,000 or 350, your life savings. Let's say you've got $500,000 in there, whatever it may be. Everybody's situation is different. And when I say $500,000, we're not talking rich people here to the younger folks. When you're older and you're about to stop working, $500,000 is an incredibly small retirement pillows. So, there are people out there who are getting up near retirement who may have a lot more than that invested in a given bank. And what we're here to tell you is you should separate that. Break that up into chunks just below 250 and put those chunks in multiple banks, insured banks, right? So that's the first part. Now, if the FDIC fails and cannot pay its debts, that's a whole nother situation. But in the end, the only way to mitigate and keep your risks to minimum is to spread that money out. Keep it under 250. And I'm not a financial advisor, but this is a no-brainer. Keep it under 250. If you've got 250 in Bank of America and 250 in Wells Fargo, you're covered on that full $500,000. If you have 500 in Wells Fargo, you have 250 at risk. I hope that makes sense. I'm trying to break this down as layman term as possible. So there's that. And then there's the potential, depending on where you're at in life, you may want to look at assets. All right. So most of us know, as you get older in years, that the wealthy among us in society tend to have a lot of assets, and they put their money into things that generate more money. If you're not about to retire right now, but you've built up a nest egg, you may want to look at purchasing real estate, precious metals, some sort of asset, some sort of tangible asset that you can invest in that will provide a return, right? Because now that asset, whatever happens to the currency, if you own a home and you've purchased that home, if the dollar crashes to nothing, now your home's just worth $20 million instead of $500,000. Got it? So or gold will shoot up through the roof the same way. Some sort of asset that will retain and increase value. Personally, I'm a real estate guy, but you do you. But that's another way to mitigate, right? So maybe you got 300 in the bank, you got 10 years to retirement, and you're wondering what you're going to do. It might make sense to say, I'll take that other 50, put it as a down payment on a condo, rent that condo out on a 15-year mortgage. 15 years from now, I'll be getting full, let the rent pay the mortgage kind of thing, make a couple hundred a month or whatever it is. But in 15 years, that will vest and you will get the full income of the rent. Things of that nature, right? So those are some ideas from my mind to help you along. Let me know in the comments if those were valuable to you. But see your own financial advisor, to get a better scope on it. Let them know what you're concerned about, what you want to hedge against, and they should be able to lead you in the right path. If they're telling you to invest in risky stuff, just dump them and find somebody new. So that being said, let's move on to the second part, and that's how do we prevent this from becoming, how do we stop this from even being a possibility? How do we get our fiscal house under control so that we don't have to sit here saying it's a guaranteed thing that our dollar is going to crash and we're going to have to work through a hard recovery and deal with all that. Well, Article 5. Article 5. And if you're not familiar, if you're new to the show, you've never seen an episode of this before, and you just watched this because you wanted to see bail-ins, understand really quickly, we have Article 5 in our Constitution. It is the article that explains how amendments to the Constitution can be proposed. There are two ways to do it, one which we have done 27 times, and then the other which has never been done because the only purpose of it is to restrict the power of the federal government. All right, and and how do I know that? Because the federal government's not allowed to be involved in it at all, almost at all. Two minor areas, but nothing that can influence what's getting proposed or what gets ratified. All right, and right now the movement that's going on, we need 2/3 of the states instead of 2/3 of each house of the Congress. 2/3 of the states submit petitions to call for convention on the same topics. Those topics right now are completely universal. The latest statistics that have come out have some over 50% of even Democrats are in agreement with the three proposed amendment topics, and 75% almost are not opposed. So there's like 25%, 24 and change that still don't know. But if it's explained to them properly and they understand it, I'm 100% confident that they would come on board. So even 75% of Democrats, it's like 95% of Republicans, or 94%, about 89% or so of independents are not opposed to a convention, to the topics that are being called for convention. Those topics are term limits for all federal officials, okay, even the deep state, everybody, not just elected, all right? Amendments on government overreach and authority. And then the last one, which is the one that's pertinent here, are fiscal restraints on the federal government. Think things like balanced budget amendment, where it's now an absolute must. If you do not propose and enact and execute a balanced budget, meaning you're not spending more than what you're taking in, then you're in violation of the United States Constitution. Now, some of you may say, well, they violate, George, they violate the Constitution all the time. Correction, they do not. The Constitution that they're going on, and you may not be aware of this, is the annotated version of the Constitution. It's a 3,000-page monstrosity that includes every Supreme Court decision on constitutional issues throughout our history. And a lot of those decisions were bad. And a lot of those decisions gave the federal government powers that it does not have under the Constitution. It was just a horrific interpretation, and the federal government took those powers and ran with it. The only way to undo Supreme Court decisions like that is through constitutional amendment. It's the only way. You notice how brilliant the system is, though. There's always a recourse to the bottom line where the final word always comes from the people. Now, we've got 19 states of the 34. That's the 2/3, is 34 states. We've got 19 states on board already, with more coming in these coming months because the state legislatures are up now. Follow the channel. I go on every time there's an update of movement for convention of states in any of these state legislatures, okay? So follow the channel, subscribe if you're on YouTube or Rumble, but I absolutely will go live and give updates each time that there's something to talk about, and there's a lot of action going on right now. And we're expecting 4, maybe 5 more states, as many as 7 or 8, with a dark horse in there somewhere that slips through, all right? Which would put us around, on average about the 25 mark, okay? We're on our way, folks. We're almost there. And the closer you get, the more open to it other states are. Because now they're seeing, all right, we get to 25, that's half the country. Half the country is a lot of it's a lot of agreement. So in the end, things start moving quickly. It's like a snowball effect. You can watch the channel more and check out our webpage to learn how to get involved. You can go to thepatriotthinktank.com/COS, and there'll be a link there to sign the petition, where to volunteer, etc. You can learn more about it. I definitely suggest you do that before anything at COS University, cosuniversity.com. But let me get back to this point. Fiscal restraints. Anything under the topic of fiscally restraining the federal government will be open at convention for discussion. Now, anything that comes out of convention is merely a proposal. It would still need, just like Congress, they propose it and then states have to ratify it with 3/4. So 38 states would need to be in agreement to ratify it. So nothing crazy is going to come out of this. There's no way it'll get ratified by 38 states. If we get the amendments that we're looking for, which are totally reasonable, right? Americans agree. This is why the agreement numbers are so high across voters, because they're general issues that everybody agrees on. The things we fight on, for the most part, are smaller issues. They're more detailed issues. They're more specifics on, more government involvement, less government involvement, this and that. Everyone believes in these issues. Everyone believes that the federal government has overstepped its bounds. Everyone believes term limits are necessary, and everyone believes that fiscal restraints are necessary. Once these are imposed, WEF is dead. There's no Marxist movement there'll still be a Marxist movement because these folks will never stop coming after the next generation of children, but they'll be meaningless because they won't have the funding, right? So I want to make that clear. They won't have the funding. If the United States is forced to balance its budget, among a ton of other real conversations that need to take place, like what are we supposed to be doing for our youth today from a standpoint of Social Security? Yeah, we know how to pay the people who are getting it now. What about the kid who's getting his first paycheck today? There's no way it's going to exist when that person comes of age. What are we doing to fix that? These questions are going to have to get taken seriously. The reason empires always fall is because people don't want to make real decisions. They just want to keep giving, and then everything falls apart. At some point, we all need to give up a little, and I don't mean in taxes. I mean just a little bit of ourselves to make it work. If the government is forced to be fiscally solvent, if that debt clock stops at any moment and comes, or even moves back, even one tick, if it just moves back, 20 cents in a year, the dollar will rise in value tremendously. America's priorities will have been set, and people will be looking at the United States once again, without need for the petrodollar, without need for anything else. They will be looking at U.S. currency as something that is strong. That's all we need. That's all we need. All right? Like I said, it's all built on faith. Nobody wants to do business with China. Nobody. People are aligning with China. These BRICS countries are aligning with China because they're hedging bets right now that the United States is not going to get our crap together. The second that we do, BRICS countries will be the BRICS countries, and no one else will want to join that mess because it's going to be run by freaking China. And nobody wants a totalitarian government with all kinds of human rights violations and dirty maneuvers to be controlling the currency that they're using as a base point. Nobody wants that. And the way to tackle this is directly from the people. There's no one we can elect. There's no Superman coming. None of that's going to happen. The only way to remove the possibility of things like bail-ins and even thinking about that type of legislation, all of this can be written out permanently. And this, what's most important, even bigger than the fiscal restraints and the shutdown of this globalist movement, is the change in the relationship between the federal government and the people of this country. The states created the federal government. It was not the other way around. That balance of power shifted. It didn't really shift, but perceptually it shifted. It didn't shift based on the Constitution. It shifted based on Supreme Court decisions. The only way to undo those decisions and clarify with no debate once it's done is to amend it and be clear in those amendments that we don't like this decision. We don't like, here's how it's going to be. You're going to have a balanced budget. Here are the penalties if you don't. That's it. This is the path, folks. This is the path. So I hope that you'll go ahead and take a look at that. I hope you learned something about bail-ins. Feel free to leave me questions in the comments. Join us every Wednesday night at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time. I will be live, sometimes with guests, sometimes just me, but I will always be answering questions on either the topics of that day or on Article 5. So if you jump on and I'm talking about, the latest news piece that had come out or some other situation and you got a question on Article 5, just jump on, throw up your question. I guarantee you, the second I see it, I'm going to put it up on the screen and I'm going to address it, no matter what I'm talking about. Because there's nothing more important right now. We all know what the problems are, right? Sit here, I don't want to waste my time telling you about the history of the Rothschild family and how America is a corporation and all. Look, I have no interest in the problems anymore. I have interest in the solutions. Knowing the problems is good. Understanding what the problems are and why we need a solution is certainly relevant. But after that, I'm done with it. After that, it's all about the solution. And the solution is Article 5. This is where it is, folks. And it comes down whether or not we win this. And when I say whether or not, I know we're calling this convention, but how quickly it happens is going to depend on how quickly people read up on it, understand its power, and understand the importance of this being the first punch in the offensive that we are about to bring, right? This is the first constitutional punch, the first muscle flex from the American people that is clear and to the point and effective. It's going to be the most clear ever in U.S. history. But first you have to understand it. First, I don't want you to just take my word for it. I want you to read. And that's why I want to answer questions for you. I want to help you in this educational journey and bring you to the resources necessary so you understand it. Because the truth is on our side. And while there are do-to-dos out there like John Birch Society, JBS, and George Soros groups like Common Cause, among others, who are trying to scare everybody away from our constitutional power, I'll address all of that for you as well. I'll even steer you in the direction to hear more of that. Because the reality is, when you hear both sides, to most people today are asking more questions than ever before. And when you hear both sides, the truth I know, because I've already researched this. I've already gone down the historical rabbit hole to understand exactly what our founders' intent was, to understand exactly what the purpose of this Article 5 clause was. And so once you hear it from the founders' mouths and you read the history behind it and you look at both arguments and you say, you know what, this side of the argument, they took a quote from Madison. Let me go find that quote and read it in context. And then, Convention of States, they're using this as a reference. Let me go read that and put it in context. And you'll start to see who's taking things out of context and who's not. And that's what I say that's what I mean when I say, when the truth is on your side, you welcome the opposition. You welcome it. Go and read it. Listen to those do-to-dos. Because in the end, you're going to realize, and you'll be a lot more effective in your fight to win this country back once you fully understand it. Because those people are out there poisoning a lot of minds with incorrect constitutional and historical information about the founding of this country, and we're here to help clean that up. So join me on Wednesday night. I hope that I get to see you there. Say hello when you get there. Let me know where you're watching from. Until next time, I'm out.
And like that,